Hi there, and welcome to episode 74 of the Analyst Brief podcast, brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffatt, founder and research analyst of the Cyber Hut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. Dave, how are we doing?
Hello, Simon. Hello to our audience. I am fantastic. How are you, Simon?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, I'm still here as a physical person, not being replaced by an AI of some level, albeit the speed of technology is operating. It seems to be getting faster and faster how things can be replaced by our wonderful AI world and all of the excitement that brings. But I think we're still here, touch wood, as physical entities, adding some value, perhaps, I don't know, to the real world while we still can. But it's AI, it's everywhere. Is it? You must have used AI today, I guess, in your day-to-day life. You must have used AI in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, all the time, every time. Across Gemini, Claude. I don't think I used Chat today, but I pretty much use all three of those: Gemini,
Yeah.
Chat, and Claude. Gemini primarily is like super easy for me to use because I have an iPhone, but I also have a Pixel. So the integration that they have with the Pixel is great. It's just so standard. And chat is good for generic stuff, I find, for me anyways. And then Claude, between like some coding stuff I might do, workflow stuff, and then it's really good at a lot of like research and producing content, I find.
Yeah.
But yeah, yourself. Yeah, what about you?
That's very similar. Well, obviously, I use it all the time, but it's very similar. I use all three to do. But interesting to try and I've been pairing them off quite a lot recently in the sense of, yes, obviously Claude's good for building stuff, but it's not very good at knowing what to build. It's very good at executing. But if you sort of get into the loop of being sort of a product manager or like a scrum leader, for example, and say, right, I've got this 3-week scrum, we do some stuff, and it's not very good at separating those functions out, I don't think. So you build some stuff, and then it'll sort of confirmation bias of what it's built is great, and it'll just keep iterating on what it's done. I think it's often quite smart to sort of maybe give ChatGPT or OpenAI the strategic product management sort of scrum leader sort of function, like build out what I want to build, and then you chuck it to Claude, for example, and say, build me this. So it's not, you're not giving it the option like you would an engineer. Really. Don't give the engineer the product management function and vice versa. So you say, right, okay, I'm the PM, go and build this and come back. I think that's quite an interesting sort of pattern. But yeah, definitely. I think what's interesting for me, I think obviously, whatever you do browser-based things, you're doing searches and stuff. It's just seeing AI creep into certain aspects of there, and we're all fully aware of things like deepfakes and fake content online, and generated posts on social media and all this sort of stuff. And you can just start to see the levels of everything's AIified, isn't it? And how, I don't know, how content is used and spelled, and the use of certain characters and terminology, and it's all, some of it's getting a little bit AIified a little bit.
And I think Gartner just published a research note, I think last week, on deepfakes. And, my takeaway from it was just overall that, to your point, with a lot of these things moving too quickly, that it's just an arms race, right? Where, one will get better than the other. So it's like you need to look at like identity verification, not as a full solution. It now becomes more of an orchestrated source that you need to verify, because their point was like there's not going to be one signal that's going to tell you everything. Like you have to pull all the signals in and go, okay, is this Simon? We did an IDV thing. I trust it, but I'm not going to just trust this. I'm going to look at all this other stuff, and then I can determine like, well, what pathway do I go next? Do I block him? Do I ask him for another authenticator or something else to increase that trust level? So that was interesting, because I think to me, it's like, again, further recognition that while we have these discrete identity solutions, that there's markets and there's vendors that sell them, it's showing that like these point solutions are just point solutions, and they just need to, I think at some point, are just going to get sucked into the the main hive.
100%, and we didn't chat about this previously, but on my whiteboard, I've got some there's some issues around so AIification stuff. And Deepfakes is one of them, as is misinformation and disinformation. I think they're very closely related. And the fix for Deepfakes is actually it's very similar to some of the content verification stuff. And the technical fix is very easy. It's signing of material, signing of objects. And by this, a lot of it's talking about fake imagery, fake imagery online. Someone takes your picture and they dock it and post it for malicious intent or malicious purposes and stuff. And it's like, well, the technology to do that, or the technology concept is the signing of that information. So everything that you produce online, you assume it's fake until proven otherwise, and you have that chain like we have with the root of trust. So you swipe in to apply a concept from firmware attestation and the chain of trust for software booting up, etc. So you take that concept and you say, well, basically, unless that image can be verified against me, it's you're going to assume it's fake. You say, well, okay, how can you do that then? It's a pretty simple technical thing around private key or security of a key that only I can have access to, and I just sign all of the stream of stuff which I as an individual produce, be that imagery, be that social media posts, content, blogs, all of that article material that goes out there. And whoever wants to read it, they verify that stuff, whether it's against myself directly or against some sort of repository there. But obviously the mechanics of that on internet scale are quite difficult. And the technical side is really simple, but I think the concept of saying, look, everything's fake, whether it's deepfakes, whether it's the articles you read, whether it's images on Facebook, whatever, if you suddenly assume all of that, undermines a lot of business models, let's be totally frank there. But the actual technical way of verifying and signing and verifying that stuff, we've done this for a long time. Take the job tokens or process station, whatever it could be. And anyway, there's definitely some real interesting stuff around. The more we AIify everything, deepfakes, for example, and voice fakes and the likes of that, generative style there, we have to have some really strong, powerful, scalable ways of overcoming some of that AIification, I think. And it's interesting. Deepfakes is a good one for sure.
I mean, you mentioned years ago on this podcast and very early on, like when we talked about CIA, and the security market spent a lot of time on confidentiality, right? And not too much time on integrity, right? And I think we have the conceptual models and technology like PKI to be able to do that. But I think you're right. It's like truly embracing zero trust and misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes. Like you don't trust anything, right? Yeah. But verify everything, right? And just having those better flowing models, and especially as we get into the world of, the big topic last week when we were talking about like asterisks and machine identity, non-human, and agents, as we talked about, is like it to me, right? It's just like we haven't solved the human identity thing, right? Because we still have silos, we still have fragmentation, we still have all of this. Right. And just the basic machine identity stuff, your secrets, your APIs, like those things, I think the market's just grasping now. And yet we've got like agents we're talking about. Right. And how do you deal with those? And they're just going to be like all of that hyper. And, the integrity piece, we need to see like, are they being validated using data that has high integrity, it's signed or whatever. And then are they manipulating data, but I trust that agent, and therefore whatever they manipulate or generate, any new data, code, you name it, I can also trust, right? So it's this whole thing of it being trustworthy. And I think, Simon, when you hit the nail on the head, it to me, in the conversations I've had, it's like people keep coming back to zero trust and saying, this is actually like, I know we've talked about that in the market for years, but I think this is the thing that is going to push us forward to actually look at it, is confidentiality, integrity, availability, but these agents, the data, the use cases, the systems, like it's just, can we trust it?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm going to pull out another subtle aspect here as well. I think you're absolutely spot on. You need to have. Integrity is huge, because without integrity, the other two fall apart quite substantially. And we have neglected integrity for well, ever, in honesty, unless there's a specific use case. Oh, and I think AI, it amplifies existing vulnerabilities. Yes, it's introducing some new things, but it just amplifies the crap that we haven't fixed.
Yep.
Absolutely human stuff, as well as others. But there's some interesting things there. And I think if we sort of zoom out and we think about, okay, strategically, where we're going to be 5, 6, 8, 10 years from now, it is going to be about assurance. It is going to be about trust. And I think the trust thing can be split into two distinct camps. There's a lot of chatter at the minute around zero trust, how it's, people are still trying to get there. Why? What's the blockers? Why are we not getting there? How can we apply it to different ecosystems like satellites and whatever, a whole host of different orthogonal areas? And I think there's two things we need to consider. One is trusting or trusted, and the other is trustworthy. And they're both very different because one's proven, one is to be proven. So there's a past tense there. So you talk about a trustworthy system. Is a system trustworthy? And there's quite a lot of that in concepts like firmware. Is your system trustworthy? So you boot something up, whatever, satellite system, or even modern laptops or mobile phones. They have that entire sort of chain of trust around the hardware, into the firmware, into the operating system, then into user land, which is obviously full of horrible bad stuff. But you've got that whole route of process execution and different levels of trust there, of course. But you basically say, look, trustworthy, is the hardware trustworthy? Is it tamper proof? And obviously, depending on what it is, you may have some tamper proof hardware in there. You might have the TPM, or you might have open the case and ink all squirts out everywhere, or it self-implodes, or does something like this if it's like a high security thing. But obviously you've got a firmware attestation, which Prov hasn't been tampered with in some way. You haven't changed the firmware and put some malicious firmware that does some bad stuff, and the firmware then links into the OS, and the OS goes through different process loads. But all of that is linked, and once that's finished, it is then trustworthy to a particular level which you deem to be happy with based on your level of risk. But that's all proven in the sense of it's gone through certain steps. It's proven in security and it's trustworthy. Now, obviously in the human world, we struggle with this because, first of all, it's hard to do that. And second of all, it's very dynamic. So we're going to this zero trust thing as a proxy and say, right, okay, we trust nothing. Simon's not trustworthy until he does IDV, strong authentication, and then blah, 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 all this other stuff. And you build a bit of he is trusted, but he's only trusted for 10 minutes with a token that's scoped, and he gets access and he's not trusted anymore. I could be running on a trustworthy system. So there's trusted and trustworthy. I think there's definitely complexity there. But back to your point though around what does AI and agentic stuff really mean here? And I think it is all about these information flows that are flying around in all sorts of different directions, and it's humans getting access to online, whatever, BTC banking, doing things in sort of internet world. You've got members of staff getting access to your SharePoints and your SQL databases and intellectual property and secret sources and all that sort of carry on. And it's all about those information flows, and the level of assurance and levels of trustworthy sort of operations. It just seems to me they seem to be where we need to get to. I think we want to get there. I think we use the right terminology. I think we make the wrong choices sometimes. But I definitely think there's the agentic thing and the AI things. It's just amplifying, the lack of assurance in deepfakes, the lack of trustworthy content online, a lack of trusted identities, and so on. So I think maybe this AIification is going to accelerate our move towards having more trustworthy information flows and end-to-end sort of things there. And I don't know, maybe the modern security stack is ready to explode into something totally different.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good distinction, right? Like trusted and trustworthy. Because I think the industry has made some really good moves over the past, I don't want to say decade, I'm going to say 5 years, but it could be a little bit more. And that's starting with, goes longer at least on mobile OSs. We saw the trusted operating systems, the trusted execution environments, all backed by that trusted hardware, the root of trust that you mentioned, right? So starting from those elements. Now they're not perfect, but it's a better posture to start with, because at least we have these controlled environments that, you know, the barriers of an attacker compromising them, it's not impossible, but it just becomes that much more difficult. And, you know, if they're tamper proof / tamper evident, then we can at least see, and that can change how we determine, you know, is trustworthiness at that moment in time. Because that's the other thing too, I think, that the industry, I think, is getting now, is that trust is dynamic. Trust isn't static, and it never will be, right? So just if you and I were a chip manufacturer, we minted a brand new GPU, and then we put in our firmware, it's digitally signed, it's locked in, and we have like tamper evidence stuff in there and tamper proof, and we go and release it, cool. But now it's in the wild. We don't know necessarily what's going to happen to it next. We don't know potentially if of course, there'll be vulnerabilities in it. If it's a complex system, there will be vulnerabilities in it. So there'll be some kind of exposure, and someone could exploit it, right? We saw that with Spectre and Meltdown. We saw that with the Estonian ID cards, which there was a Gemalto chipset they were using on those. You know, so we see those, right? And I think, where we are going in this world, it's going to warrant like an understanding of trusted and trustworthy, and understand that the big piece is that it's dynamic. And so I think what that's showing is, whether we focus on identity, cybersecurity, or together, like all this stuff has to be a constant dynamic view of the user, the session, the device, the application. And then I think ultimately what I keep coming back to, and I know you and I have talked about this, is intent. Like, I just feel like we haven't asked that question, right? You think about Gartner's definition for identity. IAM is the people, practice, and technology that enables, you know, the right people for the right access for the right reasons to enable the right business outcomes at the right times. But that's assuming that we know that I give you that access to a file system. Well, what's your goal? Like, if you create an agent, what's that agent's goal? What is it? What's its intent? Or even you as a human, what's its intent? Or you write a script, what's the script's intent, right? So I think, you know, we need to have another like almost X509-ish type standard, where for certificates we would say, hey, this is the metadata, right? This is who created it. This is, you know, all of it's like, it's MD5 stuff, like all of its information, its signature, all of that. Like, why can't we do that for agents now? I'm just using agents as an example to say like, hey, I've created this agent, and I'm going to make it explicit that it's, you know, like maybe the agent platform will say, okay, Simon, what's the goal of this agent? The goal is to find all Excel files that have number 1 in it and rename them to number 2. Okay, right. That's all. That's your goal, and just this file server, nothing else, and just file renaming is the only action I want you to do. You make that explicit. The platform maybe puts that in like a identity of the agent, hard coded, cryptographically locked, and then it starts executing. Right. Then if there's like, hey, there's behavioral stuff going on, right? Your endpoint scanner is like, okay, this agent's ripping through a lot of files right now. This could be ransomware. But then if it has a way to check its trustworthiness, to your point, dynamically, and say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm attesting to, you know, what you're allowed to do. And oh, it looks like you're allowed to do this and whatever. So it's almost like ACLs, you know, but like action, what would be the word? There's attribute-based access control, role-based access control. This is more like action-based access control, like, you know, which an action.
We don't need any more. We don't need any more access control.
I know. But that's what it's missing. It's missing like, what are you trying to do here? Right?
Let me extend on that a little bit. Let me riff on that a little bit. We definitely don't need any more style back acronyms.
No, we don't.
Just let me stamp that on the head straight away.
It felt painful coming out of my mouth. I was like, I don't want to say painful. This, but.
I definitely, I don't disagree at all. But let me extend it a little bit and put into three areas here. I think, and look, the agentic stuff is getting loads of attention at the minute because it is I think, as we said previously, it's amplifying all the crap we have in the sort of existing identity and security landscape around. You mentioned lack of trust there, verification, policy-based access control or access control into downstream systems, poor data security. It's just amplifying all of the stuff we have in our IAM and cyber worlds, which we haven't done. We're not doing very well. And suddenly you've got the human stuff times by the NHI stuff, plus a bit more, and you've got this agentic problems. You've got a huge matrix of stuff to deal with. Now, two things I think have happened which are quite interesting. One is, I think, absolutely spot on. The access control initiative concept, whatever, has had a huge spike in interest in the sense of you're trying to protect APIs, data, tooling, all this sort of stuff. It's boiling back down to this PDP, PEP model. Whatever. I'm not saying it's exactly the same vendors. There are definitely new vendors coming up and coming up with some interesting access control paradigms. But it's the same architectural premise of having some sort of policy logic, distributed enforcement, which covers a whole multitude of different things, but the whole model of getting the logic out of the thing you're trying to protect. So they're good design patterns, I think. Now, just to wrap up on the access control before I introduce the intent thing, I think what we're definitely seeing now is policy-based access control was a problem in the sense of it sort of replaced RBAC in the the RBAC explosion from 15 years ago. RBAC to ABAC. ABAC's going to fix the RBAC explosion, and then we had REBAC, which is relationship-based. That's going to fix the ABAC problem, and so on and so forth. And then you have these policies, which essentially pull in role-based stuff, attribute-based stuff, and all the rest of it. But you've got a subject, an object, some actions, some sort of declarative thing or policy-based thing which allows those interactions to take place. It used to sit in a central repository. It doesn't anymore. It's often very distributed, but it's the sort of brains behind, should this guy be allowed to go and do this thing in a pub? Are they over 18? Can they buy a drink? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's been replaced, I think, or will be replaced very soon by not humans creating policies, but AI. AI will own that policy design angle because of scale, essentially. And yes, you'll have NLP, you'll have chat ops, so non-technical people can design requirements, explain how business functions work, workflow, compliance, etc. Well, you're not going to go and see somebody doing Rego or whatever, or building policy stuff in Vordrock or within Zachamel. That's just, I think that will evaporate. Now, to extend your point, though, I think the intent thing is separate and beyond the access control. So it's something we're doing at the minute. We do our cheat sheet stuff, which is we sort of do these 6 to 10 page explainers on emerging technology trends. And I did one recently on agentic ownership. What is that? Why do we need to have owners for agents? And one that keeps bubbling up is this thing around behavior of agents and intent of agents. Now, two things I'll say on this. One is agents are getting a lot of attention right now because there's a lot of problems with how they are being deployed. Shadow agents, excessive permissions, authentication, all this bad stuff, because they haven't been around 15, 20 years. So we don't have the body of knowledge around standards, security best practices. The vendors don't have 1,000 deployments, et cetera. So there's a lot of turbulence around what do we do? What does this look like in a production environment? And intent and behavior has popped up as an area of investigation. Now, we're going to do this cheat sheet for the next probably about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And I think we're starting to see 3 sort of separate buckets which are emerging for agentic. But I don't think it is just for agentic. I think it's also for humans. I think it's for the entire sort of landscape around identity. I think there's 3 things. One is access control. Absolutely. So that's your standard PDP, PEP model. You've got authorization logic, some way of enforcing that stuff. You're going to ask it, it's going to get a response back. Should Simon have read access to this file? Yes or no, or with some caveats or some other sort of fine-grained thing. Okay, good. The next part is these guardrails. Now, this is relatively new if you think about AI in the sense of we didn't really need these guardrail things when you're accessing a web page, sitting beyond ForgeRock or a SiteMinder or whatever, because it was like the access control handled all of this for you. You could only really sort of go very linear, very narrow into the web page. You couldn't really trick it. You could do a bit of maybe cross-site scripting or maybe a bit of JavaScript manipulation of stuff.
But that's what created also WAF WAF
Yeah,
too,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah. So you have the WAF
Yeah.
stuff, and that would act as your guardrailing mechanisms. But in the AI world, you've got stuff like prompt
Yeah.
engineering, you've got ingress and egress concerns. So essentially, the guardrails are saying, how may I behave? What are the sort of outer boundaries for what my behavior should look like? And I think this intent
Yeah.
stuff is really interesting. I think the intent is then saying, well, what are you trying to do? So you've got read access. I'm not going to let you manipulate that via prompts or via special filtering or a jailbreak or a tools manipulation.
Yeah.
So you're going to read. What are you going to do with that read access? Are you going to read it and do your work like a good employee? Or are you going to read it
Yeah.
and then, I don't know, maybe take a picture of it or email it to my mate who works at a competitor or email it to a nation state who's paying me some cash, for example. So I think you
Yeah.
need to have these three sort of separate buckets, if you like. And that, back to your point about intent, what is this intent thing all about? What does that look like? What sort of capabilities do we need? What does success look like? What's it looking for? What sort of things can we put in place there? But it's all back, especially to this agent stuff, about this goal alignment. What you give and tell the agent to do. Is it explicitly doing what you've asked it? And again, all of it's about interpretation and about what you set the agent to do. Is that what it is doing? I think there's definitely a bit of concern there. But anyway, back to you, Dave. I think there's at least 3, 4, maybe some more buckets we need to add into this protection.
Yeah.
And yes, it's for agents today. I think for future, it'll be for humans too.
Exactly, because there's a number of things. So agree with the access control stuff, because in a lot of ways, like, that's still just like take your vitamins and exercise and eat well. Like you still need to properly invest in IAM, the people, the process, and the practices to make sure that all that stuff is continuously like up to date and it's clean, and people, like that's low hanging fruit. I know it's annoying. I know it's not like sexy, but it's like, that's still where you'll get a lot of bang for buck, as in terms of just protecting yourself against a lot of issues, let alone like governance and audits and that kind of stuff, right? But so on your point one, I think on the guardrails, absolutely. And the shadow IT thing is the dangerous aspect, right? I think if you were to ask, most folks, like, what are the deployment rates of these agents right now within the enterprise? And they'd say, nothing on mass. Like, that was one of my last conversations with Gartner analysts and others, right? They're like, we haven't seen anything en masse. Like, we've definitely seen, pilots and them in environments, but that is of fleet style management coming from the enterprise where it's been blessed. Your point on shadow IT, that is another concern, because it's like, well, I don't necessarily like need to get permission, and there's so many ways I can just take my data and work it on my personal device, use a comment browser, which I'm not allowed to use for work, but I'm going to use it anyway, right? Like, there's different ways around it. So I think that's where the guardrails are. I think that's rapidly going to become like, you have to have that functionality, but I think it's going to fall short of because this stuff is growing so rapidly. And I think one of the issues when you build agents or you use AI is that I could ask Claude to accomplish something today, and then I can ask it next week to do the exact same thing with the same prompt, and its way to get there, because it's non-deterministic, could be completely different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily, unless I tell it, I don't know, what its metrics are going to be. Is it going to take an optimized like route every time? I don't know. Is it going? And again, it's like when you go on Google Maps and you type in, I want to go to this destination. You're like, okay, well, here's a more eco-friendly version where you'll use less fuel. Here's here's one that's the fastest, right? And then here's whatever, right? One where you'll avoid traffic. And there could be like, this one's slower, this one's faster, this one's like 2 minutes longer, right? Like, how do you make that determination? So again, the user has to be able to like say, okay, I'm building this agent. I only want it to go back to the example. I only want it to do this file stuff. And it's like, do they have to get very prescribed, as in terms of like, you will only take this path and you're only going to do this. You're not allowed to touch anything else, right? So I think these AI models need to get better themselves, as in terms of safety, as in terms of having, what's the word? But like not to scope creep within, like I asked you just to change the color of this button, Claude Code, and you added 5 pages of code. That happened with an app I was building a few months ago. And I was like, what is all this? Like, I just asked it to change the color of a button when you clicked on a button on a web app. So my point is like, again, I that is going to be something that I think the LLMs themselves need to figure out. The agentic platforms need to figure out. There needs to be some kind of optimization stuff in there, like a compiler, but it, and then not the last piece, but the other thing I just jotted down as you were mentioning those different areas is, when we get into intent, we have to be careful, right? I've been saying that like we need to take our gloves off and expect more false positives, right? Because again, you said early on, Simon, in our discussion here today, that this is new. The problem is we don't have any repeatable models. We've got a sense of things with these agents, but we don't truly know what they're going to act like and be like in an environment before we can start anticipating how to protect them, how to optimize them, and all this, right? We have some learning to do as an industry together. But I think, you read the tea leaves properly, we're going to have false positives. It's going to say like, hey, maybe it got to the 100th file out of 1,000 files and it just stops. And it's like, this looks malicious. And you're like, no, it's not malicious. You're in that same file server changing 1 to 2, like I had asked you. Right. So I can go in now as the human and just make sure it's okay and like check it out. So I guess my point there is for individuals and for cyber teams themselves, we're going to have a better incident response like service for false positives, because I think we're going to see a ton of them more until the industry gets to like a good spot where we know we have a better view of how these agents work and what controls we've put in place to mitigate all this stuff, right? And keep them trustworthy.
I'm laughing because it's the analogy you talk about, the car journey analogy. I want to extend that in a second. But the fault, if you let's keep on the car thing for a second, because it's a good analogy.
Sure.
Back in the day when cars sort of became the mode of transport du jour, they were going 5-10 miles an hour, and also you'd have somebody walk in front of the car for safety reasons to stop it from driving into things, and it'd be limited. So your car itself that had the capacity to go fast was limited by the person who essentially chaperoned the car and stood in front of the car and walked along with it.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
That's almost like your false positives until pedestrians and car drivers and the whole ecosystem evolve. But I guess I've sort of scribbled down a very rough equation here, which probably might come to bite me in the face at some point. Well, if you talk about the intent, you talk about the original objective. But what's the thing you've given to the agent? You mentioned there, the objective may stay the same, but over time it may change, or the outcome of it may change. So you have the objective, plus the actions that have been taking place, plus the risk. Now, I think there's those 3 functions which you need to look at when you're looking at intent. Now, the risk, back to your point, is dynamic. So the risk of the organization, their risk appetite, their risk tolerance, their risk response apparatus, whatever that may look like. There's going to be some compliance in there as well. So you're going to have security controls and risk response things in there, which should hopefully be relatively static. But the risk angle is going to be very dynamic, because you're going to have threats, dynamic threats, which are changing, which will alter your risk, as will your security posture. So I think the risk angle and understanding the business, understanding the landscape, understanding what's happening right now, that will determine whether the thing that's taking place is high risk, low risk, and what is the response to that. So that is very, very important. The actions and the scope is important as well, because I think the objective is going to be in whatever natural language sort of style. So you have to really take that and be really explicit. So the big risk at the minute is agentic drift, isn't it? So you say, as you say, right, agent, go and remove some inactive accounts. Well, that sounds quite easy to understand. What does that really? Does it mean remove them, delete them? Does it mean remove them physically? Like, there's a lot of interpretation there. So you've got to be really explicit about what your objective is. And of course, the objective isn't small. It's going to be a huge objective around, buy me some gig tickets, for example. Well, there's a whole set of intent explicit sort of notions in there across different systems. You're going to have hierarchies of interaction. Is that going to mean buying a gig ticket in a particular location, a particular venue, pricing? There's a whole lot of things that can go wrong there. So you've got the original objective, and it's sort of optimization, the current scope and actions that are taking place, and the risks. You've got this three sort of variables, if you like, to add into this sort of intent coefficient. But I definitely see there's a whole set of issues around. Really got to question what the objective is. Can we question it? Can we get some explicit, remove the assumptions, get some explicit definitions of what you want it to achieve and why you want it to achieve? Should it be done now? Who's doing it and why? And the who are not necessarily the person, obviously the agent and the lineage there, and all of that sort of stuff. I think that is really, the complexity around hierarchies, agent to agent, agent working on an agent's behalf, all that sort of carry on. And I think that it smacks of issues with relationships, issues with drift, issues with not being able to see everything. So you definitely need to have a composite landscape and composite, just pulling in as many data signals as possible and being able to look and analyze across a whole host of different signals there. And the last thing I'll add is back to that time specificity. What worked last week isn't necessarily going to be the same this week. The risk is going to change. The posture's changing, and even if the agent is doing the same thing, it's sitting in a different sort of construct, if you like. So, I think this intent stuff is absolutely fascinating. I think the agentic stuff is amplifying the need for it. But I do think it's been needed for quite a while.
I think so too, and I think the other thing that's the good news here with all this is that I think this would have been very difficult 5-10 years ago to achieve, just with the maturity of data lakes, the maturity of even hardware itself, right? And the landscape. So I think the compute landscape's better. I think the ability for us to stand up data lakes and start to pull these things together to have better orchestration. This comes down to we've had this quest for protection. Right? Then we went on the quest for detection and response, because you're never going to be able to have perfect protection. Okay, so fine, I get that with protection and detection response, but I think as you said earlier on, Simon, AI amplifies everything. And look, we know on the surface that if you have an AI-driven detection and response, that's the only scalable way to respond to an AI-driven threat landscape. Cool, but that is going to balloon. And unless we have something like approaching intent, to me, I think that's got to be the next wave. And we've got the technical foundations to be able to do this, to be able to coordinate everything. So I guess what I'm saying is went from protection to detection response to now it has to be about coordination. And I think if you are, I'll just say this as a challenge, right? Not as a challenge, but a bullish point. If you had levers to turn, if you had better coordination over slightly better protection, right? You got a very good mousetrap, or you can go for very good coordination. If you're able to, and you only had a certain amount that you could spend on each dial, right? You'd probably say, I'm going to lean maybe a little more on coordination nowadays, depending on your organization, because if I can pull in all this information, now I have a better way to interpret whether or not something is, doing something bad. Fine, I didn't have the signature for that piece of malware because the vendor was too slow, or the threat actor changed it just enough that that signature doesn't work on it, right? That's where protection starts to fall on its face. But if I'm coordinated and I pull in all what's going on web, what's going on these other channels, what's going on, and it's calling back out to my PDP multiple times, right? What's also the background and the history, what's its behavior, and I pull all that in, and I'm just better at being coordinated, then I can stop it without having to use necessarily any fancy tools. I can stop it just by telling the access control brain, don't let it access anything right now. Because in coordinating all the information, something looks off. And by the way, in my last 6 months at Gartner, when I talked to a lot of clients on ransomware, like, I don't know, it was like in the 30s number. I mean, it was like 37 or something I talked to. All of them that caught ransomware successfully didn't catch it with like endpoint scanners, this, that, and the other. They caught it because they had tools hooked into the kernel and they were able to see file read write. And they went, that looks weird. Let's just take a look at it. So by coordinating file read writes with the user identity and other telemetry, they were like, we didn't block them, but we needed, it allowed us to stop the process. It encrypted. They all suffered some damage, but they didn't have like site-wide ransomware attacks because they caught it that way. So I don't see that changing. I just see AI, as you said, amplifying it. And if you coordinate better today, you'll do way better than if you like threw a ton of money and resources at EDR or whatever. Because I think EDR is just we're reaching its ceiling.
Well, I totally agree. I think, again, just think of the physical world. You think of life in general, and what you can control versus what you can't control. And the stuff you can't control is vast, which people don't really realize. The stuff you can control is actually infinitesimally small. And I think back to the security stuff, we often pick metrics which you cannot control. It's like, let's look at what you can control, which is things like coverage of your systems, integration of what you have already, coordination of what you have already. I think a lot of that is, it's again, you want to invest in the weakest part of your security chain, not making the best bit better. Get everything up to a level of match fitness. Again, 80-20 rule here. It's you get everything up to 80%, and you're going to knock out as many of those big ticket problems as possible. Coordination, integration, use what you have, overlapping capabilities, blah blah. But all of that is in your control. You can't control threat actor behavior. You can't control whether you'll be attacked or you won't be attacked. But what you can control is how you respond to that. So again, around question the assumptions of your architecture, question the assumptions of your attack models, questioning that level of trustworthiness. Is it trustworthy? What can go wrong? Basic threat modeling stuff, stride stuff, pick whichever threat model you want. What can go wrong to these things, part of my information chains or my information flows? What can go wrong? Some of that could be totally far-fetched and maybe it's not likely, but what can go wrong? And always be questioning that, always be thinking on those sorts of lines. And as you said, integrate what you have and use the levers that you have at your disposal there. And that really does provide, I think, it's future-proof way of thinking as well, because you've no idea what's coming, whether it's whatever. It could be a competitive thing, it could be acquisition, it could be malware, ransomware, any of these sorts of things. You don't really know. So you have to be able to respond based on what you can control. And it's orchestration is a good one, coordination. Both of those are good things to have, I think.
There's just too many points of ingress, egress. I mean, we've even just taking the evolution, if you will, of like our cloud adoption, and then all the CNAP tools and KIM tools, and we're just throwing more tooling because these new problems are popping up and they're apparent. And hey, like rightfully so, we're trying to solve them. The vendors are trying to build better mousetraps, and then organizations are like, well, we can't not do anything. We have to put something in place. But I think we're now at the point of like, SIM was always seen as the thing that is like the brain and it can string things together, but it was obviously lacking action. That's where SOAR kind of came out. But I think we're now past that point. And the only downside with a lot of them that I see is a lot of them are all legacy. And a lot of them were built in a world where like the notion of an agent just wasn't even there. So I think that in order to go forward, there's things that we do have to re-architect and retool in order to handle the volume, velocity, and variety. Like, I think it's cute and quaint that you might be using IAM tech that's built on 30-year-old technology. I'm not using cell phones or machines that are 30 years old. Like, and like, look, some core components will be that old, but my data backend, I don't want it to be. All my front ends, like, I don't want that to be 30 years old. I need that to be like, again, look at how young ChatGPT and Claude and even Gemini and Copilot, like, they're not old, and yet they are changing our industry left, right, and center. So like, these 30-year-old directories, like, That's great, but we probably need to look at how we can modernize it. These, we don't want to throw everything out. There are some repeatable, reusable things, but I think we're at a point, Simon, where every aspect of cybersecurity that we look at has to be reapproached, not necessarily re-architected, but has to be reapproached. And for sure, there are things that do need to be rebuilt. And I think back when I was at Gartner, and I remember, we were looking at orchestration, identity orchestration, and, you were at ForgeRock, and it's like, we could see that this won't be orchestration is not going to be a standalone thing. It's just going to have to be a part of the entire equation that is there, because again, this comes back to helping you coordinate better. And if you can coordinate better, you can do all the, that enables you, like you said, there's going to be too much change. It enables you to at least be in a better position that if there's some new version of MCP that completely changes everything, if you have done that 80% and you have your teams talking to each other and your tools somewhat integrated and orchestrated, you're going to have a better job of, being coordinated, because the attackers are coordinating against you. So you need to coordinate against them, right?
100%. It's again back to the away from cyber, right? The asymmetric information problem. The bad guys have the advantage constantly because they know their objective and they know the information they have about you as the victim. I think constantly as a defender or blue teaming, you have the asymmetric disadvantage. You don't have the full informational picture. And the more you can aggregate information together, orchestrate that, coordinate that, you collapse the sort of information problem a little bit. You can see more, essentially composite integration and so on. And it's not specific, as you said, to a particular pillar, a particular type of identity, or a particular system. We've got good identity assurance levels if you happen to go through this workflow and access that system. Well, okay, what percentage of users does that cover? Or, how many people are using strong MFA? Well, we've only got 60% uptake of MFA, and we've got 5 different MFAs. So it's like, well, okay, so you've got about, 40, 50% uptake ish. So again, it's moving away from these sort of silos or linear sort of patterns and looking more information flows end to end, much more composite way of thinking. I think the agentic
more
space,
graph-like.
Yeah, but I mean, graphs are non-functional, really. So that's a non-functional way of solving this, I think, as opposed to a functional thing. And by that, I think the agentic AI and agentic again is amplifying the weaknesses we have, and that's good. But I just think, in general, we'll get to a position where this applies to humans, non-humans, different identity types, etc. And you are looking end-to-end information flow. You are looking at just to wrap up on the car analogy thing, you mentioned the cars thing before. If you wrap this up into the objective is I want to drive to London, for example. And it's like, okay, am I trusted to drive to London? So what does that mean? How do I get trust? Well, I need a driving license. I need to be whatever, over 18, need a driving license, need insurance. I need to be not drunk, whatever. So that
the car has to be licensed too. Your license plate.
So I'm going to that. So the car needs to be trustworthy. Sorry. I'm trusted. The car is trustworthy because it's got an MOT, it is insured, it's roadworthy, etc. So that's the starting point. That's the objective there. Then you have the sort of the guardrails. So the guardrails are going to be, well, you need to drive on a road. You need to go under the speed limit. You need to, in the UK at least, you drive on the left-hand side. You go around roundabouts in a certain way. You stop at traffic lights. In the US, you're going to have different things for stop and go and the give way and how you turn on junctions. Subtly different to Europe and UK. So you're going to have those guardrails in place. But of course, my behaviour will change. Maybe I'll go fast on particular roads at night because it's quiet and it's dark. Maybe the risk is low. Maybe maybe I've broken my leg or my daughter's broken a leg, so I want to go really fast, even faster than the speed limit to get to a hospital. So my actions are going to change, and it's going to be very time specific. And the risk of that, of course, is going to be variable as well. And I think if we sort of think in those sort of blocks, if you like, around the objective, my actions, behaviours, trustworthy, and the risk associated with all of that, and all of that stuff is definitely time specific, time sensitive. Some days I don't only drive fast because all the time. Some days I'm going to be in more of a hurry than others to catch a flight or whatever. So it's a big sprawling complicated area, and I think it's
I think
definitely one that's going to be evolving very fast.
Yeah, I was just going to say really quick on it, right? And because I know we can go on and on, but the car analogy is really interesting because it just demonstrates that the trusted and trustworthiness, right? Of like you have these foundational things, your license plates, your driver's licenses, your inspections and your registrations and all this stuff. So you can be like the person trusted, the car trusted. Okay, so Simon out of the gates, he's trusted, and then you take your vehicle, and then like you said, right, like. Again, going back to if you now were purely using AI, you go into Google Maps and you're like, pick a route, and it could have slightly different routes depending on the time of day, depending on if there's accidents, depending on whatever the criteria is. And you can put stuff in like avoid highways, avoid toll roads, avoid, right? And so there's that, right? That's, along the way. And as you're driving, as you encounter things, you might speed up to avoid some truck that's driving like a maniac on the road, and you're breaking the law technically because you've blown the limit, but you're trying to get ahead of this truck. Like, who hasn't done that, right? But you're right. I mean, it's to me that I think that's a really powerful, analogy, because the key takeaway from it, Simon, is it just shows that each like, let's call it component, has its own like, chain of trust, like you said.
Yeah.
And those are dynamic. They have some dynamic nature. And then there's like what that whole system now, when you put it together, what that is doing. And I think that's where, we're missing the notion of like, what's the objective for each thing and what's the goal? And then if we watch them, have they strayed far off of it? The drift thing that you mentioned. And it's like, he said he was going to London, but now he's going like he's going north instead of south.
Yeah.
Like, right.
But the interesting thing is, I may go north just to get around a particular, maybe there's a car crash, so I will go north for a little bit. So there's going to be some legitimate drift. But as you say, if that drift goes too far and I'm suddenly heading towards Edinburgh or New York and I should be heading to whatever, New Orleans or something, that drift is too far. But it's wrapping it in the context of the route I take will vary, and it will vary legitimately up to a point. Again, back to the objective. The objective has to be really explicit in the sense of I'm driving to New York for a flight. I need to be there by 5 p.m. Well, see, it's really explicit. What does that mean? Why do you have to be in New York? Oh, flight. Okay, got it. So you can start saying, well, hang on, he's waiting for 2 hours in some destination on the route. You think, well, he must have broken down because his flight was at 5 p.m. and he's going to miss his flight. So again, the context, the explicitity of the objective, that's all got to be known. The route could vary. That's good. Drift has to be taken into consideration. And obviously the risk, the whole end-to-end risk has to be dynamically evaluated for every junction, every overtake, every interaction on the car. So
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, again, it can go into thresholds, it can go into tolerance, right? There's so many areas, and frankly, what I do, I'm wrapping back to our beginning. A lot of times on a day by day, if you were to sit on my shoulder, which I would, forgive you for doing that, but I like, depending on what the prompt is, I usually sometimes will be like, oh, okay, I don't know if there's like one outcome here. Like say for example, like tell me what what the biggest cybersecurity issue is going to be in 3 years, right? Give it to me in a probability, like give it to me in scenarios. I want like 5 or 6 scenarios, and then give me like weighted probabilities and why. So it's like, I think that's the the point I was making before was like the cool thing with where we're going is now like all this AI tech is also accessible to us, the good people, that we can use this now to have like, hey, what are the 6 different pathways Simon can go? We know his objective. We know this. We know this. Fine. He stopped for a couple hours to go to some crazy coffee place like up north, and then he's coming back down, right? Like he's still like, there's a probability of that. And maybe that warrants me, authenticating you to be like, hey, is this verified? Yeah, it's verified. Okay, cool. Let him stay there for 2 hours, right? That's an okay kind of branch off of what we can do. Or it's like, no, you've crossed the threshold with our corporate policy. You're not allowed to do that. when you're accessing, this resource, right? You've gone off for far too long. We can't accept that, or whatever, right? So it's so fascinating where we can go. But I do think we have the technical capabilities to get there now. It's just, that's the fascinating thing is how will we get there? How will we get there? What is it going to look like?
Probably a scary place. I think that's a good place to wrap up. I think it's one thing we need to really constantly remember is AI can help us on this. It can help us on this journey. It's not like we're suddenly we're lopsided here. Or we're already seeing agentic AI appear in multiple different identity and security vendors with the agents helping with triage, helping with response, helping with user access reviews, helping with all parts. So I guess back to the analogy, the sort of the route analysis angle, so using agents to say, well, these are the top 10 routes I would expect Simon to take on his journey. And if I deviate from those, it's not the end of the world, but it's just much, much quicker to evaluate and assess and look at the drift, look at the difference there. So I think AI can help. I guess it's almost the sort of bitwise shortcut operator for those who've done coding long time ago, where you're not having to look at everything. You sort of do rapid evaluation and saying, well, they're the sort of top 10 routes I would expect him to take, and he's taking a really weird route. Now that could be legitimate because he's going to pick up a parcel or something, but it could also be, well, that's really dodgy, and he's gone through 3 junctions now, which I'd expect him to have turned left. So again, AI can help that. AI can simulate and it can help us on this journey. But I think this has been a really interesting episode because I think there's a lot of stuff here which I think the agentic deployment is going to just create so many problems for that older way of thinking around your silos of PAM, IGA, IDV, onboarding. Well, it's all a little bit too, it's just going to break very, very rapidly. But I think over time, the concepts we use for agentic AI, I think will proliferate to humans anyway. So you're going to end up with this human end-to-end intent attribution system. I think will be much more future-proof, scalable, controllable, and give benefit, organizations much more benefit, I think, than sort of thinking in silos. I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with you. I would hope that this world we enter, that any of these new models we come up with, right, are applicable to all the entities that would interact with any of these digital systems, humans and machines and other devices. And, it's just, because then otherwise we're just repeating this whole thing. We're like, oh, there's some new entity we need to account for, right? Like,
Agreed. So, as you say, we have on the shelf, we have the potential for that technology there. It just needs to be wired in, plugged in, and hopefully it will fix all of the problems we've just created in the last 57 minutes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's a very positive future. We are creating or identifying new problems. I think they can also be rapidly filled in the very not too distant future, I think. Dave, thank you as always for joining me on a ramble about NHI and intent and workloads and agentic and composite analysis, trust and assurance and all the buzzwords in there, I'm sure. But
it was fun. It was fun.
Any last quick comments before we wrap?
No, I think that's it. I think we're all on this journey together. So definitely going to be keeping an eye out for some stuff. And I know, I think you just a plug for you. I guess I'll be looking for the research that you're going to be doing on intent. I think that'll be really, really interesting to take a look at when it's out.
Come next 3 or 4 weeks. A cheat sheet on intent management. Whatever that looks like, we've got a few ideas. What it is, why we need it, the capabilities there, and there's sort of 5 or 6 vendors who are doing some interesting stuff. So we will get that written up, and no doubt that will probably spawn a lot more questions and comments, which is exactly what it's there for. Our research is not the definitive comment on anything. It is purely there to get everyone talking, which I think we would all benefit from doing a lot more of. But Dave, let's put our talking to bed for one day at least. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to our audience for listening wherever you are in the world. This has been episode 74 of the Analyst Brief podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you.